Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're going to be talking more about the George Lucas fallout with Bob Iger's new book. For those that have not been following the story, Bob Iger's new book recently came out, and so we've gotten a lot of excerpts from that book where he admits that George Lucas did not like the direction that Star Wars was going. And obviously, this is something that we had some idea of for a while, but George Lucas has been relatively quiet about certain things. Obviously, we can look to some things he said, the White Slavers comment, for example, and other things that we can understand that he probably wasn't too happy. But to have it come from Bob Iger himself, making it very clear, saying, hey, he was not happy, and to explain that one of the reasons why he wasn't happy is because George Lucas, when he sold them the rights to Star Wars, also said, hey, by the way, I've got these stories here for another trilogy to follow in the, line with the other films that was made in the original trilogy. And they said, oh really? Oh, let's hear those stories. And then all of a sudden he was like, okay, here's the stories. He said, oh, we love these stories, but we may not use them, but we really like them, so why don't you just sell them to us? We sell them to us and it'll be great. And George is like, yeah, I'll sell them to you, and then we can make these movies. Oh yeah, but George, we might not make them. We it might not happen, but obviously we still like it a lot. We're going to pay you a lot of money for it. Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So they buy the stories, and what happens? They don't use them. And George Lucas is upset by that, and I think for good reason. Now, of course, Bob Iger is trying to point himself as the hero of the story, trying to say, hey, we tried to make it clear to him that we weren't going to use the stories. Yeah, but you also made it clear to him that you really had a lot of interest in it, and that you were at least going to use some of it, right? You do realize that you just told the creator of Star Wars, creator of one of the greatest IPs of all time, creator of one of the greatest franchises of all time, that his stories and his ideas were not good enough. Now, we can go to the prequels and have discussions about the dialogue and the acting in it, but I don't think anyone's going to argue that the stories in those movies are good and also are connecting to each other, right? I think that the overarching themes, the overarching stories, the overarching arcs in those stories are relatively good. Again, I will at least stand by it. I can be very critical of the prequels for a lot of different reasons, but when it comes to the actual story, it's fine. I was saying this on the live stream last night. I think that in the perfect world, you would have George Lucas writing all the stories for every single Star Wars project. You would have a good screenwriter doing the screenplays to take care of dialogue and things like that, and to have someone else directing it. I think that if you had those three things going on, with George Lucas officially being the one writing the actual story and having someone else write the dialogue for him and direct, I think that would be the best of kind. The reason why I wouldn't want him as a director is because he's not very good when it comes to directing actors one-on-one. We saw that a lot, especially in the prequels. And also, he's never been strong on dialogue. We've known this even from the original trilogy with some of the things that were written in there, and of course with the prequel trilogy too. But if he was at least on as a story writer, if he was at least on as the creative head of the universe that was being built, I guarantee you that the current state of Star Wars would be much better than it is now. You would probably have movies coming out every single year. The original plans they had for Star Wars probably could have worked out if you had his creative mind behind it. But of course, they decided to buy the rights from him, tell him, oh, your stories are great, let's buy those from you too, but we're going to do that because we don't want these stories to come out. We now own the stories, and so now you can't release these stories to anyone else ever because we own them, and now no one will ever know what the stories would have been completely because we have them. Now, of course, he's been able to release some aspects of the story. Obviously, we know that it would have something to do with the wills, for example, but we don't have the entirety of the story. So, of course, when we hear about that, we hear, oh, the wills, is it going to be like, Bob the Midichlorian or something to that effect? Obviously, we can make fun of it. But at the same time, too, I look to that and I say, you know what, though? George Lucas gave us the original trilogy. He gave us things like Clone Wars. He gave us some amazing stuff. So maybe it could have actually worked out. Maybe it actually could have been a really good story. And I bet dollars to donuts, based on what we've gotten so far, that the story actually would have been much better than it has been. But Bob Iger is really making himself look terrible, because obviously revealing that he basically dragged and made George Lucas believe that he was going to actually respect his work, that he was actually going to continue on. Kathleen Kennedy doing the same thing. And then they said, oh yeah, you know what, George? You're great and everything. You gave us this IP. You were the one that created it all. But you know what? We don't think your stories are that great, so we're going to do things on our own. And look where Star Wars is now. Now you have Bob Iger still saying we did too much too fast. Star Wars is not in a great state. Now we have, reports about the parks not doing well. We of course have Solo Star Wars Story losing as much money as it did at the box office, and all the other things going on with Episode 9, and a lot of the criticisms of Episode 9 and of Star Wars in general ever since movies like The Last Jedi, because of Rian Johnson and all the crap that he's done in and outside of the movies themselves. And Bob Iger's here now coming out with this book, and it's like, oh yeah, look how great I am. But in the end, all he's doing is showing himself to be kind of just the overall center point of where our anger as a fandom should be. It's showing us that, yeah, Kathleen Kennedy might be involved, but to be honest, I think the reason why Kathleen Kennedy has failed at her job is because she's not a creative head. I think the reason why Kathleen Kennedy has failed is because she is more of a money person. I think, honestly, it's because she's more of a producer than an actual creative head. And if she was just on as a producer and someone else like a Dave Filoni was the creative head, then I think that overall the movies would actually be better, even if she was still involved. And I think the reason why so many things are failing and why she's making terrible choices and why she's having these movies not have any connection and make any sense whatsoever is because she does not understand storytelling. She does not understand it. This is very apparent when you compare all the movies to each other. There's this disjointedness to it. The original trilogy, all are connected. The prequel trilogy are all connected. This sequel trilogy is so haphazard, is so all over the place. And we know the reasons why. We can, of course, point to Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi. We can, of course, point to Kathleen Kennedy. But I think it has less to do with Kathleen Kennedy trying to make that happen and more so just out of pure incompetence on her part of not knowing how to build a creative story and creative world behind it than anything else. And so because of that ignorance, which I really honestly believe is there, the blame really should be shifted more so to Bob Iger, especially with all this stuff coming out about what he did to George Lucas, about how it's like he bought the property from him and then he found out he had stories. He bought those stories and then he never used them. He dragged George Lucas along, making him believe that Star Wars would be fine, that Star Wars would be protected, that Star Wars would be respected, and obviously we didn't get that. And now it's getting even worse, because as you can tell by this headline from our friends over at Bounding Into Comics, from John F. Trent, he says, Bob Iger tried to get George Lucas to sign non-disparagement clause. So let's go ahead and read some of the words of Bob Iger himself, who is, again, coming out as being the biggest villain of all of this, even more so than Kathleen Kennedy. He says, even though he had issues with the film, I thought it was important for George to be at the Force Awakens premiere. He didn't want to come at first, but Kathy, with the help of George's now wife, Melody Hobson, convinced him it was the right thing to do. So not that, hey, it's gotten better and you're gonna love it, but hey, we know you hate this. We know you don't like the story. We know that you wanted us to continue your story because this is your universe and your story would have been much better. Oh, no, but we still want you to go because it's important for optics. Notice how he says it was the right thing to do. Not because it was something that he wanted to do, but it was because having George Lucas there would give a sense of a rubber stamp. Would say, hey, George Lucas showed up. George Lucas is supporting it, so obviously, therefore, it must be fine. Which we know is not the case because we know how critical he has been of the movies, and also we, of course, know because of how he's talked about Disney and the deal with Disney overall. He says here, among the last things we negotiated before the deal closed was a non-disparagement clause. I asked George to agree that he wouldn't publicly criticize any of the Star Wars films we made. When I brought it up with him, he said, I'm going to be a big shareholder of the Walt Disney Company. Why would I disparage you or anything you do? You have to trust me. I took him at his word. So here, not only do we have information that he sold the stories, or that he bought the stories from George so that George couldn't have access to them, so that way George couldn't own them and put them out himself, show us just how much better his stories would have been overall. But then he also tried to shut him up from having any criticism whatsoever. Thank goodness George Lucas said, no, you're going to have to trust me on this. And then he still went on and made the comments about the white. Again, he talks about this back in 2015 when he referred to Disney in the agreement with him, that Disney were white slavers in an interview. And again, it says, I can tell you with 100% accuracy because this came out of George Lucas' mouth. George was not a fan of what they did with a sequel. Again, that's talking about Tom Bird's detailed report. But obviously, Lucas did not sign the agreement. He referred to Disney as white slavers in an interview with Variety back in 2015, saying, I sold them to the white slavers that takes these things. And I think that's very much reminiscent and very much accurate as to what Disney essentially has become, where they have become a company that is consuming, buy out the competition, buy out all the theaters, buy out everything that you possibly can to shut out any competition whatsoever. And then in the same process say, it's our way or the highway. We don't care about your stories. We don't care about your universe. We care about what we want to do, what we want to mold, what we want to push your universe to be. And if we lose the franchise, if we lose the fans, which George obviously cared a great deal amount for a long time, it doesn't matter. That's what they think. They think it doesn't matter. And that's why it's up to people like us, it's up to people watching this video, leaving comments, part of the Phantom Menace, to say, yeah, you thought Solo was bad? We're going to do the same exact thing for Episode 9. Yeah, you might get more normies out. Yeah, Disney's machine has been rocking and rolling lately, getting stupid crap films to make billions of dollars at the box office that no one should be seeing but still see anyway. You might get those same people out there. And you might be able to push it all the way. But the hardcore fans that make up the most of your profits from not just movies, but from merchandising, etc., you've lost them. And with the more news about this coming out, with the more we find out about how George Lucas felt and about what Bob Iger did, the worse it's looking for Disney, the more people are jumping on the Phantom Menace train, and the more people that are going to stay home when episode 9 comes out. But let me know your thoughts about this and all the stuff we talked about in it today. What are your thoughts specifically on George Lucas? And obviously some people say, hey, why are you defending him? Why are you feeling bad for him? He got $4 billion. And yeah, you're right. But now it's being revealed more than ever that it was obvious that Disney was strong-arming him. And again, if I was being offered $4 billion and I was being promised that my IP, that my brainchild was going to be respected and was going to be defended and was going to be consistent, what would you do in that situation? I think most of us would probably do that, right? And then, of course, he gets strong-armed. He realizes that the deal is a lot more than he thought it was going to be. He makes the white slavers comment, but also we see what Bob Iger ended up doing with Star Wars, saying, yeah, you had these stories. They could have been really great, but we know better than you, George. And now, Bob Iger, how much of an idiot do you look like right now? So let me know your thoughts about this and all the things we talked about in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash the like button, give us a subscribe. It helps us out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.